Nikki, aka the Dragon Queen, and today I'm just going to do a PopSugar challenge, not wrap up, but update. So far I am a little bit behind. I have read 25 categories out of the 50 or 52, and I'm going to tell you which 25 I have read. So first, you do know some of these, but I'm going to start from the beginning, just because I can. So first I read A Whole New World, A Twisted Tale by Liz Braswell. I wasn't as happy with this book as I thought I would be, and I did give an explanation previously as to why that was. So I did get the next book, but I haven't picked it up yet. I'm hoping that it was just because of it being Aladdin. I doubt it, but we'll find out when I read the next one. Up next was Curtsies and Conspiracies by Gail Carriger. Absolutely adored this book. Immediately went and bought the next two, though I've yet to finish them. I might have a problem. Up next is Splintered by A.G. Howard. I had bought this book, and I've told this story before. I bought this book, and then I thought it looked really interesting, and then I bought the book again. And I realized I had it twice, so I ended up sending it to my friend who read it and devoured it and loved it, and then I picked it up. But she was right. It is fantastic. Absolutely loved it. Up next, I read Bone Crossed, which is book number 4 of the Mercy Thompson series. I have read books 1 through 3 before, but never beyond 3. So I finally read 4. Since then, I've also read 5 and 6, I believe. I own 7 and 8, and I believe it's up to 9 now. I'm not entirely sure. Up next, I read Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This was a very interesting book. I wasn't astonished by it, but I think it was more because it was less fantasy based and more realistic, though I do think it's a very powerful book to read, and it definitely opens your eyes to what's outside of being cis white in this world. So I do recommend this book, especially if you're into a more non-fiction-y fiction, if that makes sense. Next is Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosnay. I was worried about this one, and I think I mentioned it before. Now, based off the cover, it looks kind of like it's a romance, and I knew nothing about this going into it. It turns out it's more about the Holocaust. And it was actually a really interesting spin on it, on seeing it from a child's perspective, and I actually really enjoyed reading that perspective. So I gave this a high star rating. I don't recall the exact number, but I do recommend this book. Thank you again for the recommendation, Shannon. Up next, I finally read Secondhand Souls by Christopher Moore. I read A Dirty Job thanks to a recommendation from my friend M. Loved it, and when I saw Secondhand Souls was out, I had to buy it. I waited until the paperback copy came out because I owned A Dirty Job in paperback, and I really wanted to read this one. But this is also fantastic. If you haven't read it, please read A Dirty Job. It is hilarious. Up next was a book that I also wasn't sure. I kept hesitating to read it, and that was Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson. Now, this book, trigger warning, is very, very sad. It's very deep and emotional, so I wasn't prepared, I guess, for how it was portrayed, but I think it was portrayed very well. Trying not to give spoilers, because the author put the main character in a situation where she wasn't really sure what was happening, and you just see it from her perspective as to how everybody hates her, and you're not sure why, and you find out later in the book the reasoning, and then when that comes out, you see the consequences of her telling people the reasoning and how people react to that. And this is definitely true. This is something that you see in the everyday world, is how this how the reactions in this book are. And it's sad, and we need to get better at that. So read this. I'm gonna pre-warn you, it is a trigger warning. I'm not gonna say what for, but if you definitely need to know what the trigger warning is, do some research before you read that book. Up next, I read Zodiac by Romania Russell. This book was actually really interesting concept. Each planet is based off of a different zodiac sign. So there's a Cancer planet, there's a Capricorn planet, etc. And every person on those planets has a particular personality. So it's expected for Cancers to react one way, and etc. So while I know in the real world this isn't how it works, I know, for example, that I'm a Capricorn, and I necessarily won't react the same way as another Capricorn would, but that's because our life experiences are different, and there's other circumstances in our lives that will alter the way we handle situations. So it's interesting when the entire world is the same and they handle everything very similarly, and what happens when somebody steps out of that norm. So I think that was very interesting. As I mentioned before while reviewing this book, I wasn't a fan of the romances in this book. I think it would have been perfectly fine without any romance, but it probably also would have been like 100 pages shorter. I do intend to read the next book, which I think is Wandering Star. I have to find it. It's at the library. Up next is In the Woods by Tana French. This was another one that I picked up just because it looked interesting and it was a buy two get one free type deal. So I was like, okay, which of these sound interesting? And this was a mystery slash thriller. It didn't actually end the way I thought it would, but it did end with a cliffhanger. So I'm curious to see what happens next. I haven't paid attention to if there's another book coming out for this. I have to do my research, and I can't be bothered right now because I have so many books to read, but it was intriguing to find out. I was hoping it would be more horror-esque than real life, if that makes sense. I was kind of hoping for a more paranormal twist on it than there was, but overall it was still really good. Up next was a reread, and I did listen to this one, and that was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This was amazing when I read it the first time, and it was amazing when I listened to it the second time. Highly recommend this book. I know that this is a love-hate book, but if you like description, then this book is for you. Now, I'm not going to say it's as big of a description as somebody like Tolkien. Tolkien is way more descriptive, but whimsical description in this book is fantastic. So if you like that type of description, then this book should be up your alley. Up next was another one that was difficult and I wasn't really sure about, and that is Room by Emma Donoghue. This book is about a woman who is kidnapped, and she gives birth to a little boy in her prison, and the little boy has not seen outside. So you slowly learn about his reactions of finding out about the outside world and finding out the truth. And it was dark. There were some things I wasn't a fan of in this book, like how the outside world reacted to the little boy's reactions, or how the mother responded. But at the same time, I think it was more of a point of view issue than actually storytelling. An example would be when you're in the little boy's head so much, and then you see this anger coming out from like the grandmother. You don't understand why, but in real life, that's probably what the grandma's thinking, but they're showing it to you in the book, even though it's a different perspective. So it was difficult in that aspect with how to react to their irritations, I guess. So it was hard for me to get past that. I got really mad at the adults in this book and how they were responding in reaction to the little boy. I do recommend that book though. It's very hard to read though. I will say that. Up next is another book that I wasn't entirely sure of. It seems like a common theme, and that is Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This book, I believe, was gifted to me by somebody online, or I picked it up for a monthly book club thing and that I didn't participate in. So this book actually was really good. It was actually fantastic and very intense. It's about a boy who is gifted the power to control the fate of a book, and he is told, you need to go into this cemetery of books and find a book that you will love for the rest of your life, that you will pick up and you will rescue and you will protect. And then what happens when he doesn't do that? So you get to see the consequences of those actions and each person's reaction to it and the fates of all the characters. So I thought it was really well written. I liked the fact that it was like a story within a story, and that was actually really fun to read. Up next was Wonder by R.J. Palacio. This book was pretty interesting. It is about a boy who has been born with a severe birth defect, and his reactions to going into the real world, to real people's school basically, because he's been homeschooled so far, and you get to see how he learns how other people who he hasn't been raised with react to him, and basically the bullshit middle schoolers put kids through. And that's all of what this is. I do recommend reading this versus listening to it. Up next is Patricia Briggs' Silverborn, which is book 5 in the Mercy Thompson series. This book was fantastic. All of her books are fantastic, so can't really say much about that. Has anybody else ever noticed that on the cover her tattoos change every single time? Like every time I look at this book, her tattoos are different. I wonder if they do that on purpose. That makes me curious. Up next, I did read this physically, but I gave it back to my friend, and that is, it's going to be one of these sides, is Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill. This book was fantastic. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend, or that book made me want to read every Joe Hill book out there. So definitely recommend. Now, 1 second and I will get the rest of my books. Okay, so the next book that I read was Darkly Dreaming Dexter by Jeff Lindsay. This book was pretty good. It was basically exactly like the first episode, but I've been told after this book it goes into a different step than the TV show went, so I'm curious to see how this continues. Up next is The Alchemist by Michael Scott. I picked this book up because of the cover. It is definitely a cover buy for me, and I'm on book 3 now. So it's really good. I just read this one in June, I think, and I'm already on book 3 now, and I've been listening to the audiobooks and I adore them. It's a very good book. Up next, I said up next a lot. Don't take a shot every time I say that. Is Stars Above by Marissa Meyer. Now this book, if you liked the Lunar Chronicles, I recommend reading this book. Read it after you've read everything else, or if you want, you can look it up online and find out what stories you can read in the book. But this is so good. It gives you so much closure. So much closure. Loved it. After that, I read Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. Now, I read this in June, and I've already read books 1 through 5 and book 1 of the Lost Neptune series. So I definitely see why this book is so liked. But granted, it is a middle school book, and I am listening to the audiobook, so it makes it a lot faster. But this is a pretty interesting series. Because it is for middle schoolers usually, I will say that it's pretty easy to determine who the parents are of the children. Basically, Percy Jackson is a demigod or a half-god, and you find out who his father is in this book, but it's pretty obvious shortly in the book who it is. And with other characters too, it's usually pretty obvious as to who their parent is. Up next is Lord of the Flies. I listened to the audiobook of this. I don't know where my paperback is right now. It's on my shelf somewhere or in a box somewhere. I looked for it, I can't find it. It was okay. I understand why this is one of those books that are read in high school, but I wasn't a fan of it, but I didn't think I would be, so I'm not shocked by this. I finally read it, so yay. The next one I attempted to read, and I do count because I got 60% in, was 1Q84. I still need to post a review on this. I gave it 2 stars for my review. If that tells you anything, was not a fan. Next is the next couple of books I will go into more detail about in my next wrap-up, but I read The Magicians by Lev Grossman. Really enjoyed it. Definitely see how the TV show season 1 is pretty damn close to the book. So the only difference that I've noticed is, if you've seen the TV show, is the TV show goes way into more depth of Julia, the main character's Quentin's friend from childhood, where the book puts more of a focus on Quentin. Julia is very rarely mentioned in the book. So that's the only thing I'm going to say. I decided that Caraval by Stephanie Garber is going to be my 2017 release, because Peace Talks by Jim Butcher, my original choice, has been postponed right now. He just started working on it again, but I highly doubt it'll be done this year. So I decided this one would be my 2017 release, since this was released in January of this year. And that, the last one will be another one that I changed around. It's going to be the audiobook, and I just picked Neverwhere, the last audiobook I listened to by Neil Gaiman. Technically, I've listened to probably about 40 or 50 audiobooks this year, but I just picked one random one instead of having to listen to Mistborn. I do intend to listen to Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson eventually, but I just haven't been feeling it lately, so I'm not going to force myself to read it or to listen to it and hope that I like it when I couldn't get into the book. So in total, I believe I have 25 books out of 52 that I have read. If I finish One Good Dragon Deserves Another and Genius the Game by the end of this week, I will have 27. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. I would have to read 3 books in the next 3 days, which is not impossible, but improbable. And then if I read, I have at least 1 book so far on my reading list for the reading quest that's also on this, so that would be 30. So as of this week, I should be at 32. Starting Sunday, it should be 33. So I am a little bit behind. I'm trying to find a lot of these books on audio, but that makes it difficult because the library doesn't necessarily have as many as I want. And a lot of these, as you can tell, are first books in series, so I want to read those. I will also like to say that while they weren't part of my PopSugar challenge per se, they were something I wanted to read. I have officially finished all 7 Harry Potter books. Hooray! And to celebrate, I will show you my wand. Isn't it pretty? Pretty. I got this from Elliot's Wand at MegaCon, and it was really interesting. They do it just like Ollivander does in the thing, where they basically pick the wand for you. So how he did it was he based it off my eye color, my date of birth, or my birth month, I should say, and something else. And then he basically pulled out 6 different wands. Now this was the first or second one he pulled out, and when I picked it up, I'm like, I really like this one. And then I really liked that this matches my eyes, because one thing that the question with the eyes was, what color are your eyes? And I'm like, oh, well, they're blue-green, because it depends on my mood, it depends on what I'm wearing. My birth certificate says blue, but a lot of times my eyes will be green depending on the day, basically. So I liked how this bottom thing, I don't know if you can tell in the camera, but it's blue, and then if you tilt it a certain way, it's green. And I thought that was really fitting. So yeah, I'm excited that I finally finished all 7 Harry Potter books, and I will do a review for those, all 7, the entire series, and maybe eventually I'll watch the movies. I don't know if I will, but anyway, like it if you like it, subscribe if you want to, and this is the Dragon Queen signing off.